Craig Lipset is the head of clinical innovation, which seems to me like a great title for a job, and worldwide research and development at Pfizer. He has a very interesting personal story as a physician investigator. And he's going to show you later the blue button and a whole nother level of thinking about how Pfizer, which is slightly better held in American public opinion than the US Congress in terms of approval rating, how actually biopharma sees itself, Henry Waxman notwithstanding. But the point is how Pfizer itself, actually by engaging patients in a different way, could be both creating value for patients and doctors in the clinic, but also be creating value for its stockholders. And this is not an inconsistent idea. Craig, you got the greatest title on the stage. You're the head of clinical innovation, and you've got a blue button. Tell us, first of all, tell us what you are doing in terms of pulling back the curtain, and then tell us about the blue button.
Sure. Thank you for the compliment. I do think I have a great title and a great job, and in many ways it lets me embrace my background in research and embrace my background as a patient and embody those experiences into the work that we're doing at Pfizer. I increasingly find that many of us have blurred lines, right? That we quickly try to compartmentalize on the stage that there's an industry guy, an academic guy, a patient representative. Patients are building the expertise that rivals academics. Academics are very fluid in and out of the industry, and many of us working in all of these sectors are patients ourselves at one point or another, and so it's hard to just compartmentalize our experiences and expect those to work in isolation. At Pfizer, I've been working over the last few years on many of our initiatives around data access and raising that curtain. Over the last year, Pfizer has opened up access to patient-level clinical trial data for studies dating back to around 2007, without exception. That we have a website where external researchers can submit requests for that. Many companies have done that as well. We're not unique in that space. Many companies were trying to move aggressively to get ahead of legislative initiatives out of Europe and wanted to be able to understand and get in front of that. And in fact, the trade organizations for pharma in the US and their sister organization, FPA, in Europe, put a line in the sand, encouraging their members to go there and making data accessible. Many of the companies have been experimenting with different ways to make that data accessible. Some have worked, as Janssen did with Yale. Others have formed independent review committees to review those requests, to try to keep it at arm's length. At Pfizer, we considered it initially something more of an experiment and have been managing that mostly internally. We do have an independent review panel which only reviews instances where for some reason the internal Pfizer colleagues want to decline that request. And so far to date, we have not used that independent panel. We have not declined any requests that have come through. So on the one hand, we can say, we've raised the curtain, we're working to earn trust and be more transparent, but we've raised the curtain, and in many ways, the chairs in the audience are empty. We're not getting a lot of requests. In many ways, this was a great initiative to help earn trust and help make data accessible in some cases. But where we need to spend more energy now is on two areas. One is around understanding what's working and what's not in terms of best practices for our approach, for the work that Yale is driving, the work that Glaxo and others are doing on a shared initiative. But we also have to help find ways and encourage those ways for researchers to make the most use of all this vast data that's now available. We fully support the work of DataSphere, Project DataSphere. We're proud to be a part of that initiative. In the room next door, I think there's a panel on Consortia. Don't get up and run. I'll give you the highlights.
They're good.
Consortia are good.
It's like in Animal House, you know, Faber College, knowledge is good. The headline is Consortia are good.
Consortia are good. And in many places, they're another vehicle where we're finding ways to share and make data accessible. The Critical Path Institute is represented in that panel, and Their Coalition Against Major Disorders is another example of where companies are coming together to share data, whether it's control arm or other data. Transcelerate, another initiative where folks are trying to share data to make it more accessible, whether it's control arm or otherwise. And so we need to fill the seats in that theater now that I think the curtain is going up, raise awareness, and also help find those best uses so that we can actually achieve our desired end state in getting medicines developed faster. For me personally, the other hook to all of this is around the patient, because I don't expect many patients to click on our portal or Yoda or GSK and start asking for access to data, although I think over time, as I mentioned, with those blurred lines, I'm sure many patient advocacy groups have the appropriate level of sophistication emerging to be able to do just that. But I think in the near term, our interests have been around ensuring that patients who participate in our clinical trials have access to the results and the learnings, which are often locked up in scientific journals, in scientific language. And so how can we make those results and learnings consumer friendly and accessible to patients and get those back into the hands of the patients?
You want to bring up, but because you're trying to solve you're running a big experiment and solving part of that, you want to bring up the blue button?
Sure.
This is not a naked product endorsement for Pfizer, it's a real innovation.
Well, it's funny you mention that because how many folks here are familiar with the blue button? This is an enriched audience, right?
Right.
When we first started working with the blue button, I had some folks inside of Pfizer that came back to me and said, Craig, that was a brilliant angle to take Pfizer's blue logo and to brand a button leveraging that color. And I thought, well, I'll have to thank the folks back at CMS, the VA, and everyone else who came up with that before I did. I think it was on slide 14.
Yeah, you're 14, yeah.
So I mentioned a moment ago what we're doing to try to make
There you go.
patient summaries available.
Well, the chemo brain's in the way, brain fog's in the way of the button. There you go.
So the actually, if you click to the next slide, you'll find the button there. There are two elements facing the patient that we're working on. One is around making those summaries available, which is just taking the language that's in a CSR and trying to make it patient-friendly, and then working with regulators where we need to make sure that we can actually get that back to patients without being seen as promoting. So how do we convert that into the right language, use the right independence and oversight to make sure that it's communicating the science and the results, in particular where a drug may not be approved or an indication may not be approved. And as you can imagine, we have to be able to do that on a global scale where our trials enroll around the world. But with the blue button, the effort was more around patient data, because when you participate in a clinical trial, you are generating and helping to create a vast amount of data about you as an individual. Data which very often you may not have access to. Just as it's that analogy of the data vault was mentioned this morning, the same is often true for the patient and their treating physician. For us, the blue button was an experiment that is seeking to enable patients who participate in studies the ability to click and download their own individual electronic clinical data that they generated during the study, and to do it in a format that's meaningful, because that's the beauty of the blue button. I didn't have to create a format. The blue button was already created by our friends at HHS and ONC as a way to help make sure that data is liquid, and that if the VA is enabling patients to access their electronic health record data, how can they do it in a way and in a standard that they can actually do something with that data? That's something I don't have to help them figure out what to do. That's the beauty of the blue button. Other entrepreneurs much smarter than me are coming up with fabulous tools for patients to be able to share their data with their providers, put it together with other EMR data, support clinical risk assessment calculators, and the list goes on and on. So we're just taking advantage of an ecosystem that already exists to see if we can help patients who participate in studies take advantage of all the open data enthusiasm that's taking place today with the desired end state that is twofold. One, we hope that through access to their data, it will improve their overall health and outcomes together with their treating physicians, that they can leverage that information. If you're in one of my studies, we probably have a lot of blood work, a lot of EKGs, a lot of other data that was captured serially over time. But the other element to this for us is we're trying to open that door to two-way data flow with patients. That whether it's how patients are sharing data in registries or otherwise, the ability for patients to be able to aggregate their own health data and share that to support research will transform the future of research and development.
Let's talk global consent.
Global consent, and I think the other prescription where I think global consent can be an enabler is around clarity for the patient around how their data is going to be used when it comes to a study. I think that most patients expect that their data is liquid. If you put it into one registry, it should be available in another. If you put it in one study, why can't it flow, as you're describing, into a registry? To me, that parlays into this last prescription, which is around that ability of the patient to not only control and access their data, but to be able to share that back. And we see time and again now I've seen at least 5 different studies over the last 2 years, 90+% of patients with access and control to their electronic health data are interested in sharing that data to support research. 90+%. Even if that number is half, that's still a remarkable number.
That's a big idea. Well, that was the big finish, and we